So welcome, Perennial Pride listeners. I'm really excited about this podcast. I have a cool guest with me, Ryan Condie. Very interesting background. He's has his own podcast, Let's Buy a Business, which in itself is very intriguing. I'd certainly highly suggest you go listen to that, especially if you're trying to buy a business. But he's an entrepreneur. He owns multiple businesses, doing it part-time. So we'll get into that. I'd love to hear more about that. And he helps people sell their businesses, online businesses, right, as an advisor. So really anxious to kind of learn from him and his journey in entrepreneurship and life and business. And hopefully it'll give you some good inspiration to think about whether this is an area you want to get into. Ryan, thanks for joining me today and being on the podcast.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it. We'll dive into a lot of fun things, I think, and probably a lot of my losses.
It's funny when reading some of your bio. It's amazing. Started 8 businesses and bought 4 and sold 2. And it's like, was that last year?
Yeah. Those numbers I've actually bought 7 now. So we've increased it a little bit, but yeah.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Started a lot of businesses. Some were great. Some weren't that good. But about 12 years ago, I bought my first online business. And I thought, hey, this is a lot easier than, starting from scratch with no product and no customers and no profit. And then I was like, maybe I should just keep doing this and buying businesses that already are established, and sort of took me down this path that was self-education over the last 10 plus years getting into it.
It's amazing. It's amazing. So yeah, let's go backward a little bit and just think about how things started, because obviously I reflecting on where I came from, never really experienced anything around entrepreneurship, business ownership, even though my father, he was a physician, owned a practice. He was in business. He just didn't know it, really. He was, so I didn't really get exposed to it. So tell me, how did everything start with you?
Yeah, well, we were talking just before this, Tom. I come from a family of teachers, so not a lot of risk takers. My father was in business, worked the corporate route for many years, but my grandparents were teachers. My mom was a teacher, 2 siblings that were teachers. So I'll come from a family of teachers, and I'm the odd one out. From a young age, I always had these random ideas, or I'd try to sell just stupid crap that we had at our house out my front door. I was always trying to sell stuff, and I had the normal jobs you have in high school. I worked at the movie theater, cleaned up popcorn, all that fun stuff, right? And eventually it was like, hey, this is just not really what I want to do forever. And then I went to school, and I didn't get a lot out of my education other than, when I was in university, I met my wife, I met some of my best friends and my partners now. And I took a class in business school from 3 private equity people. And they basically were like, hey, these are real businesses that we've bought. We're just going to open up everything. We'll be very open and transparent. This is how we buy businesses. And it just really piqued my interest, and I learned a ton from that course. But as much as you learn from anything in college, it's all theoretical. And it put this seed in my brain of like, oh, like there's this world of buying businesses out there. And of course, I didn't go down the private equity route. I didn't get an MBA. I didn't go down that path. I ended up going a different path in the tech world, and then stumbled upon, I was in the tech world, fast growing startups. It was a lot of fun. And started to think like, I don't really want to do this forever. Like you do that hall pass, Tom, where you look down the hall and you're like, who do I want to be? And I didn't want to be anybody there, right? I didn't want to be the manager. I definitely didn't want to be the VP. I didn't want to be any of those roles, right? I wanted to just control my schedule and everything. And how it started was I was online. It's 2012. This is before Shopify won for back-end e-commerce and all those things. And I went to go buy a wallet from this business, and they only had like a couple options. Like it looked like the business wasn't doing very well. And I reached out to the owner and said, hey, do you want to sell your business? And he's like, no, I don't. And I'm like, okay, well, that was a fun conversation, but hey, here's a few ideas for you. Because like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to buy businesses. And it turns out we just became friends. Like for the first few times, I just kept calling him every week and been like, hey man, I got another idea for you. Do this. And then out of nowhere, and by the way, I don't even know why I asked like, hey, do you want to sell your business? I don't know why it occurred to me. It just happened like spur of the moment. And then after about 3 months, we were pretty good friends. And he's like, hey, I'm ready to move on from this. Do you want to buy this business? And I was like, yeah, great. And I was like, I don't know how to buy businesses. And he said, great. I don't know how to sell businesses. So I started, Tom. And then it got me down this path. And so I put a lot of time, effort, energy, learned a lot on the e-commerce front, built that business, grew it substantially, sold it a few years later, and then continued to do it more and more again. And so I've done everything from online businesses to selling physical products to content sites. And then offline in 2014, I started a candy factory. I went back to starting businesses and started a candy factory. We scaled it to dozens and dozens of employees and got it into some big box retailers, and a lot of stresses that come with having a ton of employees. And I went back and said, I don't know if I want to be doing this in 5, 10, 20 years. I want to go back to where I had a lot more flexibility and control of my schedule, and got back into the acquisitions world. And I picked up every book. Watched every YouTube video, every podcast that you could do just for self-education. And it's sort of morphed into this world where I live in all things acquisitions, where people are building and buying and selling businesses all over the place.
Wow, incredible. It's one of the, back to the education part. I mean, I guess to your point, it's theoretical, but then until you get into seeing it and all the actual things you need to know and learn and experience, I mean, it sounded like that was a exceptional learning environment to go through those early stages of those businesses.
Yeah, it was beneficial to make some mistakes on some small acquisitions as the acquisitions have gradually gotten bigger and bigger each time. And you make mistakes on the small ones where the risk is quite low. And hey, look, it sounds like a lot of your listeners are former W-2 employees. Guess what? I was one too, right? You were too, Tom. We're very risk averse. You get addicted to that paycheck every 2 weeks. And so you're trying to do things in a way where you reduce the risk. And I was able to do that on these small acquisitions and these small ideas. And most of my businesses have failed that I've started from scratch. And that's just the nature of ideas. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's probably me that the idea was good. It was just poor execution. But there is a different path, and it's actually through acquisitions where you can buy a business that has profit, it has revenue, it has customers, it has a product market fit. You don't need to reinvent all that stuff. And then, of course, you don't need to be the next Mark Zuckerberg or create the next Facebook. I can't remember who said it, but there was an entrepreneur who said it. Maybe it was Andrew Gazdecki from acquire.com. But he said, your first business should not just change the world. Don't change the world, just change your own world. Once you've changed your own world, then your second business can then go out and change the whole world. And I think that's something that gets lost on a lot of people is focus on that first business, changing your own world, getting you out of that W-2 or supplementing that income or having your spouse not work anymore, whatever that goal is. And then that after you've had that big success, then you go shoot for the moon or whatever that big shot is.
Yeah, that's incredible advice because I think even recently reflecting on myself and thinking about, you mentioned earlier, like 10 years ago, I mean, the amount of what you've done and learned over the course of time, but it's probably enormous, right? But like you had to get started somewhere and build upon
and you're going
it.
to make mistakes too, right? So you want to set those. And I don't know from listeners and they're like, it sounds like they've got different journeys. And I always think too, there's always this transition that you're making from a W-2 to business owner or people who want to do that. I've also seen, Tom, some really interesting businesses over the last 2 years where people have had side incomes. These entrepreneurs have had side incomes. They've had a great career where they're progressing, growing, becoming directors and VPs. But on the side, they give up some of their Netflix binges and work at night or early Saturday mornings, and they build a business on the side. And I've seen people have $200,000 to $500,000 exits every 2 to 5 years. And they just keep doing that over and over again. And so sometimes you think, oh, I need to go buy a $5 million business. That's great. That's going to replace your income or whatever, or 10 million, whatever that looks like. And then also there are these smaller businesses that are really interesting for people who just want something to put their creative juices into.
And that's what it is. I think most people probably think, and in some cases it would, maybe requires a lot of effort, right, to own the business, but perhaps some of them are so mature or just need tweaks here and there that maybe can become more of a passive income source. And so do you talk more about some of those that maybe you've experienced over your life, of your experience, like where that actually materialized after just a little bit of work, getting it kind of going, it can be passive?
Yeah. I almost never see a business that's truly passive because I feel like if it's truly passive, it will go to zero. The most passive businesses I've seen is being like an LP or like a limited partner in like a real estate fund or something like that. And so I think that is part of the myth is nothing is passive. Like you can't have your cake and eat it too when it comes to business. There are businesses that require less time than others. And that's probably where some businesses are going to require 40, 50, 60 hours a week. And other businesses might require a couple hours a week. And it just depends on what you're trying to do and leverage with scale. I joke that like people want to get into buying a business because it's passive. And that's like the least form of passive investment you could ever think of. Like you're better off buying like Wells Fargo. Well, maybe not. Maybe pick a different, maybe not the banking industry.
Not now, yeah.
March 2023, right? Maybe pick a GM or someone who else is going to kick off dividends. That's going to be your best passive investment. Buying a business, though, isn't necessarily going to be passive, but your returns are going to be significantly higher, right? And so I think everybody's looking for passive investment, but I would think too, what's probably more important is leverage on the time that they put into their business. And if I think about the money I've invested in the stock market and look, you make your 8% over the next 40 years and it just kind of cranks and does its thing, right? That's great. That's very, I would say, low risk if you've got the time horizon to be okay with that. Now, on the opposite side, a lot of times you can buy a business in the $500,000 to $5 million range for anywhere from, say, 3 to 4x annual profit. Okay. So say that business is making $300,000 a year. That's about a 3x, maybe a 3.2. You're going to pay about $1 million for that business, right? And there's a million different ways to structure that. But when you think about that, you're essentially buying a business at a 3x. If you just maintain it and you paid all cash for it, you would make, say, 33% on your money, right? Well, you're not really making 33% on your money anywhere else in the stock market.
Yeah.
It's not like real estate. Real estate's going to be less risky, but that's also why you have cap rates 5% or 4% or whatever they're right now. As you fast forward, when you think about an online business, an offline business, it doesn't necessarily matter. They're much higher risk, but I've seen people grow that business 20% year over year, 100% year over year, 200% year over year. And then you just don't have those multiplier effects that you would have in other investments. If you think about just how investments work, if you're buying a business and you grow at 20% each year for the next 4 years, you've essentially doubled that business in 4 years. You buy that business for $1 million. It's not crazy to think that you can grow businesses that are at that scale, that are small, at 20% year over year. All of a sudden, 4 years from now, that business is worth $2 million. You've paid off 4 years of loans. If you do exit that business, you essentially make the difference of whatever you put in. You get that capital paid back and the difference of whatever your loan might be in terms of that. So I say you can have incredible returns, but by no means is it passive, unless you wanted to be like an LP or invest in someone else who's operating the business and you're more of an on the investor side.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. I think I often talk to folks about this and the misunderstanding of what, even from a tax return that says passive income, but if you get a piece of real estate, you have to pick the property manager, even if you're not managing it, right? You got to kind of watch what's happening or someone's going to take advantage of you in your own business, right? So these are all areas where there is some active management of it, even though when my accountant writes it down, it's passive income. There's going to be it's an active sport. Right. And that's why you can have a lot higher returns, but you got to have that recognition that's going to require a little bit of your effort, right? And attention. It's not truly passive. And so and certainly in the area of business and real estate, that's an area that we espouse a lot because, that's where the IRS colleagues can be your friend in that respect, can be a partner with you too. Right, in this whole thing to help spur the economy and all those fun things. But it comes with active management for some of it. So you just have to kind of recognize what you're getting into. So I love the idea of starting small with stuff, right, and building into it. Yeah. So how did you? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think along those same lines, you have to start somewhere. And since I'm in the acquisition world, I see a lot of deals. I see a lot of buyers. I talk to a lot of sellers. I just talk to a lot of people in the space. And ultimately, it always comes back to, Tom, is working backwards. It's like, where do I want to be in 5 years or 10 years? And you spent 20 years in corporate America. I spent 8 years in the tech world. And you do that hall pass and you're like, hey, do I want to be in that role in 5 years? Or do I want to be sitting in that seat in 10 years? Or do I want to be doing whatever I'm doing 10 years from now? And if the answer is yes, great. Like you love it. But in my case, in your case, and maybe many of the listeners, it wasn't. It's, well, where do you want to be in 5 years? And then what are the decisions you need to make over those next 5 years to actually get you there? And I think that is applicable to anybody, whether is switching a job or switching a business or switching to a business or switching even just companies, right? Switching careers. That business acquisition is going to be interesting if that's the problem you want to solve and where you want to be in 5 years and work yourself backwards to that. I think there's so much short-term dopamine hits that we get in our world now that we just expect results really fast. But in reality, if you're able to take a 5, 10, 15, 20-year horizon and work yourself backwards, all of a sudden you're not going to be too worried about, hey, what's happening in the latest Netflix show, but let me take a longer view of what's happening here and then work yourself back.
No, that's great. No, when you get on this sort of hamster wheel, for lack of a better term, and you kind of don't even look that far ahead. You're maybe counting the days till your retirement.
Yeah.
That's the typical. And I said, this is not the road you want to be on, but thinking ahead and thinking, what do I want my life to look like? Right. And how do these investments or things sort of support it, which is not typical. Like it wasn't what I was thinking. I was just like, let me find ways to make money. Right. I wasn't really thinking about how it affect my lifestyle per se, but I really challenged folks with that because when I had to go through this myself, to your point, like, do I want to have the same lifestyle? Right. And the progression in a career and all that, and say, do you really want that? But step away and say, okay, well, how do you want my life to be? And how do these investments or careers actually support it? It's usually the other way around, unfortunately. And I come to that understanding later in life. So it
Yeah.
sounds like you found that out pretty early.
I've been on a mission to figure out how do you build a great lifestyle while building great businesses. And many of the people that do that, they don't want to be found. You don't know who
Mm,
they are because they're not going to be on the front page of whatever magazine of Inc. They're not going to be on the Inc. 5000. They're not going to be sitting courtside at whatever NBA game. You just don't know these people, but these people have existed and they do exist. And it's taken a lot of effort to find them. And I found these people, and over the years, they've become my, unofficial mentors. I want to emulate what they're doing and building, and they're able to build great families, build great businesses, but have fun at the same time. I've always thought it's crazy to think that I would want to go on some awesome vacation when I'm 65 and I have bad knees. Like, I want to do it now so I can jump off waterfalls. Like, I'm not going to be jumping off waterfalls when I'm 70, but I can now, right? And so there always is a little bit of a balance there. And I think there's not necessarily a right or wrong path for anybody. It's more of like what's unique to you. And I think sometimes it's getting the space to think of where that the mental headspace of separating yourself from, hey, this is what society or the news or people think is right and what's right for me versus what is actually right for me and what do I want to do. And I think I learned this the most, Tom, when I went from married with no kids to married with our first kid. It was like a different stage in life. And all of a sudden, there's these different stages, and now my kids are getting into the point where they're getting into school and all those things, right? And all of a sudden it's a different stage of life. We can't just pick up and say, hey, there's good weather in Wyoming, let's go hit up Jackson Hole and the Tetons. Like, you actually have to plan that out a little bit, and you have these different stages. And I think if you can understand which stage that you're in and plan accordingly, then work yourself backwards to figure out what that ideal life may be. And it might be switching jobs and staying in the W-2. It might be buying a business. It might be starting a business. It might be joining your brother or sister or your sister-in-law's business or something. Like, there's so many options there, but we almost don't take a step back to think about those.
Yeah, no, great. Looking internally, what do you actually care about, right? What really is truly valuable to you? And are you spending your time and your resources that support it? And sometimes we can get into that rut. I certainly did through the course of my career. And you just kind of go blindly into it, right?
Yeah,
Scroll to
yeah,
the next week
absolutely.
and wait for the weekend. And it's sometimes hard because external pressures are easier, right? They're the expectation. Just follow the course, right? What you're supposed to do versus actually create what you actually want. That's harder.
Tom, with some of your listeners, how have you seen people make that switch from maybe being on autopilot to switching to very proactive on attacking attacking the direction of the life that they want to go after? Have you seen people do that?
Well, I think the first thing that they kind of, and it's been lately more of the trigger of like something bad happening, unfortunately, in their lives, whether it's
Oh,
surrounding
yeah.
them, like almost like a slap in the face, like, oh my God, I am mortal, right? Or something could happen to me. I could lose I mean, it almost forces that, but like to me, it's like, for some cases, it might be too late, right? But in other cases, it requires almost like a come to reality of what life is. And so finally, people are starting to make proactive sort of decisions to do something because without that, it just becomes like you're just on the ride, right? You're kind of the passenger in this journey of life. So it does, unfortunately, it's causing people to look at like maybe something close to them that actually spurs them to do something. And that's my hope is that people just do that before they even need to.
You have the glass shattering in your brain of like, oh, wow, like this is happening. I've seen that too happen a lot of times. And there's different scales too, Tom. And let me share an experience that I've had that when life was painful enough that I wanted to change, right? And I think that's just human nature is we like comfort. We like being comfortable in the sense of I don't really feel like I need to push myself for anything. And there usually is, it's a death in the family, it's a divorce, it's this big event thing that is so negative in someone's life that forces you to change. It can also be a small trigger. And with me, when I was in the tech world, I remember adding what I felt like massive amount of value to something, a lot of value to the company. I felt like I added massive amount when they were very early on, and then it was a lot bigger, and I didn't feel like I was being taken care of. And I remember going in and trying to negotiate a higher salary, and probably didn't do it that well. But I remember thinking, if I'm adding this much value in doing and training new people and all those things, and I'm not being recognized on this tiny amount, what's it going to be 5, 10 years from now, right? Like I'm always going to feel underappreciated and undervalued. And it was this small event, but it was very eye-opening for me that if I ever wanted to create the value for my own family and the value that I felt like I could create, it all came down to how I treated myself and what I was okay with. And I was done being okay with mediocrity of how I was getting paid and valued. And that was enough for me to make that switch. And luckily, I have a very supportive wife who comes from an entrepreneurial family. And she knew from the very get-go, from our second date, that probably one day I was going to take all of our life savings and put it into a business. And I've probably done it multiple times now. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. And so she knew what she was getting herself into. But there is this pain, and you kind of need it to happen outside of you first, or that event has to happen outside of you. But if you can do it now and save yourself the pain or the lost 5 years or 10 years or 20 years or however long it's be, it's significantly better and you'll have a lot more fun. I promise.
Yeah, no, that's great. And listen, I think you mentioned your kids, and I'm looking at my kids as they're getting a little older, mine are a bit older, and trying to give them some guidance on at least give them some information and knowledge so they can kind of figure out their own lives. And these sorts of things, taking ownership, like I'm a very, very big sort of proponent of that in any way or shape. And like the world's not happening to you, it's for you, right? And you got to figure that out, and giving them some options. Like, how do you see this for you and your family? Like, as you're building these businesses, and what are you thinking about for your kids as you kind of move forward, as they kind of grow older? How are you introducing some of these concepts?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll start with the first story. So today is Friday. We're recording this on a Friday morning. I went skiing yesterday afternoon with my oldest, my 7 and 5-year-old, and my father-in-law. We went skiing with my kids because we got just telling you, we got like a foot of snow here in Salt Lake. And I was like, we got to go skiing. What that means is I worked hard in the morning, worked early, got up early, and then I actually worked in the evening again. But that was impossible for me to do a few years ago. It's not that I took the day off. I took the hours that I needed off that I could go skiing with my kids, and it allowed me to have that flexibility. I'm not at the point where I'm going to take a month off and not work, right? That's just not the point that I'm at. I'm working on lots of deals and they rely on me, and they're very time sensitive. How I've sort of helped, I feel like, and we're in this process we have a 7-5 and a 2-year-old, and my kids we have 10 chickens in our backyard, and our kids in the summer will collect all the eggs, take care of the chickens, and then go sell the eggs, right? And they're able to do that. And then they take that money and they need to save some of it. They donate some to a religious organization or church, and then they spend the rest on like Ninjago Legos, right? But they're understanding the concept of money. They're understanding the concept of selling. I am out there with them, and they're in their front selling lemonade and selling the eggs, and just to make sure nothing weird happens in 2023. But they have to interact with the customer. They have to take the money, give them the eggs. They have to do those interactions. That's one thing that we've done, and I felt like it's actually been really good. And as my kids get older, we'll be able to do that on a larger scale, right? I feel like we benefit from a few different things, and we are able to homeschool my oldest, who would be in first grade. So through homeschooling, we have some curriculum it forces him to make decisions on the fly rather than just following the mold. And so that's one thing. Another thing that we've done. So those are some of the areas that I've tried to instill back to my kids. And also I try to include them on a lot of things of like, hey, this is what we're doing here, and this is how this works from a money perspective, or this is what I do on a daily basis, and let me show you. And hey, I used to have a business where we sold outdoor gear, right? And I used to walk them through, and they would help me package everything and ship things out. And I would say, this is where it came from. This is what it's made of. And this is who we're shipping it to. And try to walk them through how they're actually this flow of products and goods. Are they understanding it? I don't know, Tom. They were 5 and 7. But I'm trying to instill it at a young age that they have control over a lot more. They have control over their emotions. They have control of what they want to decide. And if they want to buy a Ninjago Lego set, they have control of, okay, go collect the chicken eggs in the back. And it's a highly subsidized business, let's be honest, by me and my wife, right? But they go collect the eggs and can sell them to our neighbors and things like that.
No, that's just terrific stuff. It's personally just heartwarming to hear things like that because, one, obviously you're connecting with your kids, you're teaching them valuable skills and knowledge that they'll hopefully stick with them, right? And they get older, it will. And in the world I live in, Wall Street, in the wealth world, I was like, how much can I pass on to my kids? I don't want to pay taxes. But the other part of it is what you just kind of mentioned. You're instilling so many good values and the ways of thinking in them. That's even way more valuable than any dollar you can give them, because you're giving them the ability to think for themselves and create their own worlds, which they'll last forever.
Yeah. And maybe I haven't thought too much about giving to my kids yet because I feel like they're so young and everyone's invincible, right? Until they're not. I think too, I don't necessarily push on them that they have to start their own business and be an entrepreneur and all those other things. I want them to be free thinking. And if they want to go down this path, great, they can do that. But they've been instilled to make decisions and own up those decisions and be accountable for those decisions at a young age. And I feel like that's something that can get lost. And when you're not accountable for your own decisions, you lose out on the upside at the same time. You lose out on the downside. And that's what everybody's so scared about. But you also lose out on the upside. And I think that's something that I've tried to instill with my kids.
No, that's great. Yeah. I'll throw in a dorky economic term, opportunity cost, right? We talk about this all the time, like the time and money we spend on certain things. What does it stop us from doing elsewhere? Right? That's a big cost for some people, and maybe they never reach their potentials. And for those who are listening, right? I mean, I went through it myself, right? It's a journey and self-reflection and discovery. And the concept of starting businesses is potentially scary for a lot of people. And I know you gave some great insights on just trying to think of the end in mind, that concept. But, for anyone who's maybe thinking about it, what are any last things you would suggest they really spend some time mulling over, first a step or two to think through, like if they want to go on this journey?
That's a good question. I help host a entrepreneurial class locally in the community, and we do it once a week for 12 weeks. And we do that once a year. And it's pretty fun. We get all sorts of cool ideas and how people are thinking about it, and all different levels of people who've never run a business, people who have run businesses, and all different levels. And one of the things I would think too, Tom, and talking to other entrepreneurs is I probably would at the beginning, especially if this is a first step for you, just do something that gets you out of your comfort zone. And let me give you an example. Just jump on Facebook Marketplace, buy something that you know something about, negotiate it down, and then just turn around and sell it and see if you can make a profit. and that you'll learn more about business than you will in 2 years of business school doing that, right? And I think I wouldn't overthink it at the beginning, but you want to just start developing those skill sets where you're forced to put yourself out of your comfort zone. Because as you get further in to either buying a business, starting a business, being a business owner, you're just going to be put in situations where you're constantly making decisions, and there's no right or wrong answer, and it's not black and white. It's not clear. You might be operating with 40% of the potential information that you actually need to have. And so I usually just recommend, hey, just go try to make $1,000 on the side over the next weekend, and make it a short time frame, or over the next 2 weeks, or whatever is achievable within what you think you can do. Or just buy something on Facebook Marketplace, flip it, and see if you can make a profit. And I think that's the first step of just putting people outside their comfort zone. And I remember the first dollar I made online, and I thought, wow, people do this? Like, this is crazy. If I did this, can I add a zero to the end of it? And whoa, wait, if I add a zero into it, can I add 2 zeros onto the end of it? And then it just starts getting more and more interesting, right? It starts somewhere. It doesn't matter where you start. It's just a matter of getting started. And then after you've done that for a little bit, then like start taking some steps back and saying, where do I want to be? Because I think we can get into analysis by paralysis by planning and planning. And look, I can write in my planner. I write in my journal and planner all the time. But at the end of the day, I still need to go, like, the rubber needs to hit the road somewhere.
Yeah, you got to take action, and talk about all the time, take massive action. And I'm one of those guys, I can overthink things, and it's taken me a little time to kind of get over that. So I get it. But even something small, and it's so funny when you were saying that, talking through that, Ryan, I reflected on the moment. There was a time I was going to a real estate investor meetup, and I'm like at the doorstep, and I'm like, this first one, I don't know anybody. I literally almost walked away.
Yeah.
And I just forced my ass to get in and mingle, and it was disaster. I didn't talk to anyone. And as I left the meeting, saw somebody, and we just caught each other's eyes and started chatting. And it was just a great connection. And we ended up doing tons of deals together, a good friend. And but it took that just burst to get in.
Yeah.
And force myself to just say, what's the worst can happen, move forward and go in, and you never know. Right. And you just have to kind of continue to push yourself in those little things, because you'll get more resilient with it. I'm sure it's created that for me. It just takes a little bit of pushing yourself a little bit.
Yeah. I think everybody will look back and say, oh, this was a pivotal moment, and this was a pivotal moment. And they don't have to be huge moments, but they're little moments where you just better yourself. And I love that. You and I met through a mutual friend, Spencer Shaw from Podkick. He does the editing for all of our podcasts, both our podcasts. And I met him because I did the exact same for you. I went into an event, and him and I hit it off in the back, and I don't know, 5-6 years later, we're close friends and all those things happen. And I almost didn't do it, right? I almost didn't go, and we wouldn't be chatting here today if I hadn't done that and met Spencer.
Well, I am absolutely grateful for all that you guys met and that I got to meet Spencer through you. It's amazing. So I really appreciate it. I know you shared some tremendous insights. So for people who are interested to learn more about you and certainly your podcast, like where is best to kind of connect with you?
Yeah, so it's letsbuyabusiness.com or Let's Buy a Business, wherever you get your podcasts, on Apple, Spotify, everywhere. You can follow me on LinkedIn, Ryan Condie, Condie. You can follow me on Twitter, Ryan Paul Condie. Yeah, just send me a DM. Happy to connect. Happy to be a sounding board. I see a lot of deals. I help sellers exit their online business. I help buyers on all different fronts on the podcast. And I always see myself as a buyer. And so always happy to be a sounding board in any deals that you might have.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it. It was awesome. Appreciate it. And we'll probably have to have you come back soon. We're going to talk around round 2 of this. So thanks a lot for joining me today.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for everyone listening too.